So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar on interior design and architecture. My name is Gui Perdrix, and I'm honored to take you today on a little journey into the world of how to design and create co-living spaces. This webinar is part of what we have at ArtofCo called the Co-Living University. We're hosting one webinar every month. The next one is going to be on resident community experience, and we're also going to tackle technology, sales, and marketing operations. And if you missed out on any webinar beforehand, we're going to upload them very soon on our website. For those who are new to this webinar, let me present you ArtofCo, and we are on a mission to empower co-living entrepreneurs to create the future of housing. We do that through incubator programs, accelerator programs, advisory, and also knowledge. We have the Art of Co-Living book, and we're putting effort into creating once a week the Everything Co-Living newsletter that many of you receive. Also, if you have any co-living news that you want to share, please feel free to send them to us because we can relay them to our community. And finally, one thing that I wanted to present you today, I'm going to talk about it at the end again. We're organizing a 2-day mastermind in Europe between March 8th and 10th. It's going to be a weekend with around 15 to 20 fellow co-living entrepreneurs. If you're interested, we're going to send you a link after this email to check it out. And if you want to come for a weekend and learn a lot through sharing and exchange, then please let us know. All right, more information on ArtofCo. And with that, how are we going to make the best out of today? What I suggest to you is please feel free to take as many notes as you want. You're going to receive the recording and the presentation afterwards. And there's 2 main questions that you can ask yourselves, like 1, what type of ideas could I apply to my space? And 2nd, what are some key principles that I should follow while creating or designing my co-living space? So, ready? I'm going to drink a glass of water and let's go. Now, let's start with the fundamental question, why design? And the reason is very simple, is because design primes your behavior, right? Like whatever you put in a space and the way you design it is going to influence the way that people will act throughout the day. If you have common spaces next to one another, then people might be able to see each other way quicker than if the common space is at the end of the corridor. Same thing of like the elements that you're putting in the space, it's going to prime people. And so the fundamental question is, or there's certain questions that can be answered. And the way we think about it is that co-living is a science, but the art lies in putting in your special touch to it. And so today we want to share with you a bunch of principles that are guiding interior design and architecture work and how to apply it to your co-living space. And these principles, if you want to learn more, are from the Art of Co-Living book that was written in cooperation with around 200 co-living operators. And we're going to take right now like some of the main principles and see with examples. So where it all starts is this. For yourself, you need to ask yourself one question. That is, what type of experience or feelings do I want my residents to have? Before we dig into what to create, we need to ask ourselves the question, why to create it? And space will help people to be in a specific state or have a specific experience. For example, if you want people to feel relaxed and comfortable and homey, most probably you're going to choose a different type of color set than you want that space to be stimulating. So the first question to ask yourself is, what type of experience and feelings do I want people to have? Once you have that list, you can go further and then optimize your space for the states that you want the people to be in. And keep these as your guiding values. And finally, the way to approach design and architecture as a co-living operator is also, it's an opportunity to find a differentiation point. You want to be that, it's not an apple, it's a blueberry. I guess it's a greenberry. You want to be the greenberry between the blueberries. And what I recommend is, or like the ideal outcome for you is like that you can find maybe 3 things that are going to make your co-living stand out from others. And these are the things in terms of design and architecture that you're going to focus on and specialize in. And now the question is, which ones will it be? So let's explore. First, what do we mean with co-living? For those who are new, there's 3 major types of co-living spaces. One is the type of where co-living residents share an entire house. Usually you have 15 residents in there, and then they share common spaces and kitchen. The second model, most common, is that you have 3 to 6 residents who share an apartment, and sometimes these apartments are all part of a larger building, but separated in these clusters of 3. And finally, we're seeing more and more new developments, usually with micro units, but sometimes a hybrid between micro units and shared spaces or shared apartments. And so we're referring to co-living when it comes to all of these models. Now, what are the space ratios? And that was around like 2 years ago. So we differentiate between 3 types of spaces. One is called community space. These are co-living spaces that really emphasize on community. One example is K9 or Tech Farm in Sweden that put a lot of effort into, for example, like community rituals. And these spaces usually have more common space than individual spaces. But when it comes to 98% of co-living spaces, usually the ratio looks more like this: 80% for private spaces and 20% for shared, sometimes even lower if you can have a lot of units. And finally, when it comes to the spaces that have around 25 to 30 residents, here I'm talking about an operator like Outside, like formerly Rome. Well, here it's almost balanced, because usually you have like more outside spaces, it's more in rural areas, and you're gonna have like things like garden terraces that count into that. Couple of new trends that are happening in terms of size is we're seeing more and more co-living operators going the very narrow side of individual spaces. Some of them now innovating in terms of like pod design. In Los Angeles, for example, it's very common. And the other trend is that we're seeing some co-living operators or developers now that are doing a hybrid between micro units that are rather small, let's say 15 to 20 units, and some larger ones, 40, 45 square meters, to have a different type of audience. Maybe a couple with 2 kids, people that are more established, that wants to have a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. So these 2 trends of co-living concepts now merging different types of accommodations are what is shaping from an architectural point of view. And now the question is, from all of the principles we're going to learn today, what type of spaces are we talking about? What are we applying these to? Well, you can think about it in terms of like 4 types of spaces. One is social spaces. These are the spaces where you exchange with others, typically the living room, also the kitchen. Then you have solitary spaces. These are the spaces where you want to be able to be by yourself. They can be shared. For example, a co-working space where it's silent, or a library, are some of these spaces where you can feel like you can be in your own bubble. And then we would suggest to think about 2 more. One is entertainment spaces or experience spaces. It can be cinema, outside area. And the other one is aspirational. And aspirational, I think, is like whatever fits in most with your mission or your brand. So if you are creating a brand that is around health, then I guess like the types of spaces here would be a yoga space, would be a gym, would be maybe a cold plunge in a sauna. If you're more into, for example, arts, then here the types of spaces would be like an art studio, right? Or maybe a DJ recording booth. This is a framework that can help you to map out the different types of spaces. We're going to send you the presentation, but basically when we looked at around 30 different co-living operators, all of them had kitchens, and then co-working quite a lot, as well as event space and gym. Library and music room, of course, less, simply because it's more niche. We're going to send you this list as well. And one thing maybe that we can say from this list is there's a question of, do we need a co-working space or not? And I guess it really depends on your audience, but most co-living spaces, at least after a certain amount of units, around 30 units, they start including a co-working space. Simply because then you can find the equilibrium to actually create a space. And in your ideal case scenario, you always want to have a shared space that is silent and one that is social. Same thing with, do we need a kitchen? Well, kitchen, yes. And here what you have to think about is also a good balance between private kitchens and like shared kitchens. And what we can see more and more is that in the larger co-living developments, individual units have their kitchens or small kitchenettes, and then there's a few larger kitchens to create more communal meals or potluck or co-organized events. And so one thing that I want to share with you is this way of thinking about, there's more things that we can share than just rooms and kitchens and living space and workspace. When we analyze what other co-living spaces are sharing, we can go into more intangible things, which are harder to share, but which could be shared, especially if the design helps you. For example, in terms of utensils, co-living spaces can share food. bathroom, small appliances. When it comes to food, for example, then you have to think about a design that allows that. For example, having one box that's really specific for like common utensils or common food, and then another areas, which is for private ones. Same thing you can do for clothing. I once lived in a co-living space where we had at the entrance the open wardrobe. And it was a wardrobe where people could just put belongings that they maybe didn't need or they didn't mind sharing. And it was a fun way to actually interact with others. And finally, you have intangibles. Intangibles like time, income, knowledge sharing. Here, for example, some co-living spaces are doing like time-based or swapping or trying to create that between members. Here, it has nothing so much to do with design, but then you can think more about the design of the user experience and here how important it would be to, for example, have an additional tool or to offer an additional service to your members. So a couple of things before we show some real examples. There's a question of finances, also for interior design. And there was one question that was asked a couple of times, which was, does better design, is it more important than location? And the second question was, does better design help you to increase your pricing? And when it comes to the latter one, yes, of course it does. But I would say only after a certain range. And what we're seeing is that a lot of co-living operators, they're all trying to go the very standard type of furniture with a focus on common spaces, or they go more the high-end feel, which is actually a mid-term offer. There's very, very few co-living operators that go to very high end in terms of design. And for the first question is design more important than location? I don't know, and I guess it depends on your concept, right? If you, for example, target remote workers, then location, if it's not very center, is actually totally fine for your concept. But generally speaking, people need to be in an area where they feel comfortable with. And that's most probably actually going to be more important than just design. Now, one thing that you can do when you open your co-living space is that instead of buying furniture, you can rent it. There's a bunch of co-living furniture providers. Just type into Google co-living furniture in your city. One that's very known, for example, in Europe is Loft. They're very great. They also have a magazine. Highly recommend to check out. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing is you can use secondhand material. Co-hubs in Brussels is very, very well known for that. They also work with an interior design architect that just used for the first buildings, just reuse material. And that's another way to also actually bring your budget down and also actually stand out from a more unique point of view. It does cost you more time though. Now, one principle that we want to share is the notion of clusters. We already talked about it a tiny bit. And the notion of clusters is this. There's a limited amount of people that you can have a connection with as an individual. In fact, most people have around 5 connections, which is the close friends. These are the people that you share your fears with, your struggles, that are there for you in your daily life. 15 people is what we call a super family. That is the people that you have a lot of trust with and very special bonds. Maybe you don't see them every day or even every week, but they are part of your inner circle. And 50 is usually the good amount of numbers for groups. When it goes larger than 50, it's really hard for groups to remember who is whom and who has a connection with whom. And finally, 150 is the maximum amount of people that you can have meaningful relationships with individually. So why is this important? Because if we think about that, if you create a co-living space for 150 people, it's not going to create this feeling of intimacy. Now you can think about recreating smaller communities within that large community. And that's what we call clusters. Here's an example of one floor plan from Open Door, a pioneer in co-living in the US, especially in terms of community building. And the latest design included shared spaces for around 9 suites. So 9 residents would share a common area. And same thing for example, Urban Campus, they thought in terms of clusters. What you can see here on the right is the shared spaces they have on top of the building. They have 70 residents in the entire building. And then each floor has a common shared space for 15 residents. And in fact, these 15 residents are living in 3 different apartments with a shared kitchen. So how does it look like? It looks like you have, as a resident, you're sharing an apartment and a kitchen with 5 others. You're sharing a living room with 15, and you're sharing big, large common areas with the entire building. And that recreates these smaller notions of intimacy and communities within the larger one. Same thing for Haven Co-living. Haven Co-Living has around 120 residents. You have 8 buildings that look like that. And in each of these buildings, you have several rooms where people sleep in pods. And in the buildings, they share common areas and kitchen. So again, how does it look like? You have 80 people in total, 20 people per building, and then per room, 3 to 4 people, right? And that recreates smaller levels of intimacy. You can also think in terms of floor plan as reconvertible. And here that was a design made, I think, by Holbich Kushner architects, where the idea was that you create spaces that could be shared, let's say, for example, for 2 people, but you could also separate them. They could be rented out individually. And you could also, they could be used for 1 person or 2 people, right? More or less, actually, at the same time, you can use the same amount of space to also create common areas, and ideally also some that are interconnected. And finally, there's a mistake that sometimes happens is that when clusters are too big. And here, this is an example of ECLA, ECLA, which is a 1,100 person co-living space in the south of Paris. So huge building. And the founders had really great intentions. They were inspired by the American universities and wants to create these vibrant campuses, but their common spaces are just way too large. And what it does is that nobody is going to want to sit here and relax and maybe read a book. Not only from there's no way that you can actually put your back against, but also it's just open and it's not intimate. So don't make your clusters too big, because if not, your spaces won't be used. Now, another challenge in designing co-living spaces is to create spaciousness, and especially because you want to create dense spaces. One of the key challenges here is the notion of the bed, and we're going to see why, and that's because the bed takes actually a lot of space away in your room. Now, what is important if we want to make somebody feel safe at home, right? And the first thing is isolation. We need to isolate people in terms of sound, in terms of visually, and as well in terms of sound and visually. And the third part is also in terms of basically lighting or external perspectives, right? So like we want to create spaces in which people can have privacy. Now, these spaces don't need to be big, but they need to have these things in order, first of all, to feel private and secure. Now, the second thing is give people control over the light. And that's one super simple hack that you can do, but very few co-living spaces actually have adjustable lighting. That's a super small hack where you can give people the feeling of ownership, and it can also be by giving somebody, for example, I actually forgot how this is called in English, but it's like lightning guirlande, right? And second, take care of the bed. So as you can see, in most common, in most bedrooms, the bed would lay out like this, and you would miss out on around 70 centimeters on each side, and it will be a big struggle. So what can you do? One inspiration here is Node. They've done an incredible interior design work, and especially in their new residence in Madrid. Oh, and as you can see here, oh yeah, it's going to be in this hub called the Node Alcobendas hub. I really recommend to check it out. And one thing, what you can see here is that the space around the bed is kept very minimal, and this one is co-used with the living room. And as well, you have this separator that you can put there so that if you want to have even more privacy within your small studio. Super smart. Another one is Kubul. I mentioned Kubul a lot. They're one of our favorite co-living players in France. And here what they did with the bed, as you can see, is they put it literally in a sort of cupboard. And that creates really a lot of space. And then you can close it. And once you close it, you don't even have the impression that your sleeping place is just right here. I stayed in there for like 5-6 days, and it really felt a 30 square meter apartment, even though it was 20. And then other things you can do, you can use modular design. This here on the left is a solution called Ori, O-R-I. And they do beds that go up and down, and it creates a lot of space within your co-living. And this is a solution here created by Cutwork Studio, which doesn't work with electricity, but it works manually. And so there's also these options to like deal with the bed by putting it up. And finally, you have other options, which are, for example, taking the bed and making it clip-clop, right? Like clipping it up or tugging it in. So once you did that, there's another thing that you can do in your co-living, and that is adding physical elements. And these elements will enhance the connection between the people, as well as the interactions they can have. So quick thing, there's something called the 20-second rule. I don't know if some of you have heard it, or maybe you can guess what it is, but the principle is this: somebody is not going to take an action if it is 20 seconds further away than it would take. For example, if a guitar is laying on a sofa, I might just grab it and play it. But if it is on top of a shelf and I need a chair to get there, most probably I'm not going to do the effort, right? So what you want to do is you want to create or add elements that are in reach of people. So one thing is in adding interactive elements. And one of our favorites here is, for example, blackboards. I've shown you the image of Urban Campus before, and they had on every floor huge blackboards, and they were really cool because people could add activities, they could add like words, key tags, and so it was this reflection of the culture within the space over time. Same thing you can do with whiteboards. You can even do interactive elements like having at the entrance of your space some post-its with like, here's what I can help and here's what I need help with. So you can become creative, and I would just ask yourself or do research of like, what could be a few interactive elements I can put in my space that will allow people to interact. And finally, what really important as well is you want to avoid the tragedy of the common. And the tragedy of the common is that in shared spaces, if they're not designed well, then people will engage in certain behaviors that will ultimately harm the community. One of them is, let's take the example of the fridge. If you don't have compartments in the fridge, it happens often that residents will forget their food in there, it starts to rot, and then it creates all of these unnecessary tensions in the space. Same thing for dishes. If dishes are not cleaned and somebody leaves a dirty dish in the sink, then somebody else can do that too. And then suddenly the entire kitchen is dirty in a couple of days, although a week before it was maybe super clean. So what's important here is you need to design, especially in the kitchen, shared spaces where everybody has their individual compartments, whether it's in the fridge, whether it's for dry food, and whether also it is for storage areas, especially in co-working spaces. Because if you have storage areas in co-working spaces, then you can give people the options to take their belongings, put them away, instead of having them lying around all the time, which you don't want. Finally, one thing that you can also do is add more experience-driven spaces to your co-living. One of my favorites is like sauna or ice baths, because very few people are doing it, but there's a super high demand. Everybody I'm talking to, they're like, I would love to move into a co-living space with a sauna. And then second can be other things depending on your concept, right? If your concept is about maybe certain passions, maybe then a cinema room or an event space would fit in better. If your concept is maybe around gardening, then even like a botanical garden would fit. Think about spaces that could help your space and especially your concept and your users. Few examples also of multi-purpose spaces. Here, this was in We Live before We Live shut down. They had in their laundry machine areas, they also had like play zones where people would actually connect, play ping pong, table tennis. You can combine the same thing also with like maybe a small bar. They also had here an open supermarket where you just would take belongings and you would pay. It was on a trust basis. So that was a really cool example. And another key principle to follow is like to make the space feel like home. And for this, I grew up in Germany, so I have a German word called Gemütlichkeit. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but Gemütlichkeit is a word used to convey the idea of a state of feeling or feeling of warmth, friendliness, and good cheer. Other qualities encompassed by the term include coziness, peace of mind, and a sense of belonging and well-being springing from social acceptance. So to me, that is the ideal home. If I want to create a home, I want to create a home that's gemütlich, in which I can feel that sense of peace and of familiarity. And there's a couple of ways, like very easy ways that you can do that. One of them is adding biophilic design. One of my favorite architecture studios called Catwork. One of the designers, Bryce, he wrote in the Art of Co-Living book, he wrote in the last question, asked him, what would be just one recommendation you would give to anyone designing co-living spaces? And his response was that, put a lot of plans, a lot of plans, a lot of plans. And I love that because it does change a lot of things. So one thing, biophilic design. One of the favorite examples here was a space called the Assemblage that really incorporated biophilia. And the second thing they incorporated is textile. You can create this feeling of Gemütlichkeit with, for example, carpets or with areas that are more cozy and that you can touch. Note as well on the concept of Gemütlichkeit that this bench here will most probably never be used because it's way too small and is not gemütlich, right? And so here you can also see that, yes, sometimes not every designer can get it right. And that's why it's important to work together. Another couple of things that you can do with the space is individualize them. So give the people the feeling of ownership. And how can you do that? One example is you can let people choose the arts they have in their spaces. At Zoku, for example, you can take frames that are outside and exchange them. You could also have different typologies of rooms, even if they have the same layout. Maybe one can be the minimalist type of room where you only have like white walls and some plants. Another one can be the cozy room, which is, for example, a carpet and more red colors. And the third one can be the productive room, whatever. So that could also be an idea to give people that feeling of like, oh, I can have a space that really appeals to my needs. And same thing with the lighting. We talked about lighting. You can also put it on railways. So you can allow people to actually customize the way that their space looks like and the way that they can use it and that it's lit. Finally, another idea that I haven't seen anyone do yet, but it could be really different room types. We talked about different styles, but it could also be really for specific interests, for musicians, for couples, but also maybe for different typologies or people with different needs. And yes, and so one question that people had that I want to slightly touch about is like, what's the role of tech when it comes to designing co-living spaces? And there's a couple of angles here that we can mention. But the first one is tech is basically fundamental when it comes to security, right? And here we're not thinking only about cameras, we're thinking also about access control. So and that touches base again with like architecture and design, because you want to design spaces in which people can easily go in and out, but also they're secure so that intruders can't come in. There are modern ways to do that, especially, for example, with remote lock access like Salto or Sophia locks. And you also have now modern ways to secure your building where cameras don't look like this, but are, for example, integrated and don't give people a feeling that they're being observed. But now tech is, I think, most important when it comes to creating experiences. And there's a lot of things you can do as an operator. For example, Gravity Co-Living in the UK, they connected their water heater with Wi-Fi so that the water heater automatically adapts and turns on when the user uses it most. That's one feature that couldn't be done with tech, and it helps to reduce electricity waste as well as electricity waste. And other things that could help from an operator's perspective is you could gain way more insights from your space and also being able to optimize it and optimize your operations. Imagine that, for example, your bins are connected to some Raspberry Pi technology, which costs like around 15 euros, and it indicates you whenever they open. Then you could see that the space is, for example, not being cleaned correctly. And so then you can check in whether it's actually a question of the cleaner or whether it's a question of the residents in the space. So technology can play a huge role when it comes to the experience within the space. And we're going to have a dedicated webinar on technology happening in 2 months. So really excited about this one. And finally, what's the future of tech and co-living? I mean, we're going to see more and more, I think, technology in co-living, and especially it's not too far away that we're going to have robots in there. And I wouldn't have believed so like around a year ago, but when you see today what type of robots exist on the market, that are available for around 50,000 euros, they can actually help cook, help clean, basically being a personal butler. When it comes to large space co-living spaces, I believe that in a couple of years, it will be worth an investment to invest into such technology. So we're going to see co-living spaces that are more and more tech-enabled, and where certain technologies will be rather affordable in a couple of years. And that can include a bunch of things. It can include, especially like in very hot spaces, glass that can turn that turns dark, so that you have like less sun and also use less AC. It can be air filters that are next to like ACs, so that it gives you like better air in the building, especially in like big polluted cities like maybe Mexico City or actually in many capitals in the world. So there's a lot of technology that we can think about and include in the spaces to make them better in terms of like well-being and in terms of experience. So these were the main highlights for today, and these were also like the main principles that we had that we want to share with you. We have also a bunch of resources, and especially for everyone that is designing co-living spaces right now, we found out about a tool in December called Rayon, and that really, really is amazing when it comes to designing co-living spaces. And I'll tell you quickly why. Basically, you can sign up. Actually, there's a free version for up to 3 plans. And it allows you to easily move, for example, furniture around, but also allows you to, for example, move walls around. And as soon as you do that, you can click here, and then it extracts you all of the relevant data, for example, square meters. And then you can use that very quickly, export it in a spreadsheet, and use it for feasibility studies. And you can also collaborate with your team. And it's super easy. You just import a PDF or you import a PNG, and it recognizes your file and your floor plan, and you can start playing. And finally, it also has a library of all of the elements, like, for example, 90 or 120 centimeter beds, everything that's industry standard, so that you can play around and see how it would fit. So that is our favorite tool for interior design and architecture. And you don't need to be an architect in order to start working on this and start having fun. So that would be one big resource for today. And then the other, if you want to dig deeper, we highly recommend the Art of Co-Living, where here we dig into a few more principles, like, for example, thinking spaces as adaptable, but also thinking spaces as encounter points. We mentioned other examples like creating also the so-called buffer zones, which are spaces that are kind of a hybrid between private and collective, where you can cross each other as moments of serendipities, but they maybe don't have any specific usage apart of just being a center point. And yeah, finally, please feel free, join our upcoming webinars if this one was of use to you. Our next one is going to be on resident and community experience. And actually, we had a big feedback today from a friend of mine who's also a sustainability expert, that sustainability wasn't mentioned too much. And I agree with that. And so next week, or on the next webinar, we're going to touch upon sustainability, and especially also how to incorporate it into your user experience and how to design your user experience from A to Z. So that's going to be the next webinar. And yes, finally, one event that we wanted to share with you. For those who don't know about it, on March 11th in Cannes, there will be a 800-person event called Housing Matters. It's part of MIPIM, which is the largest real estate conference in Europe. And the association Coliv, which I'm also part of, is organizing this with MIPIM. And it's going to attract a lot of co-living operators, developers, investors, and as well as people in similar segments, including BTR, but also co-housing and cooperatives. So for those who want to come and who are in Europe, really highly recommend. You can also attend just that day, and we will be there. And we are also, as we mentioned before, so these were the attendees actually of Housing Matters. And we're also going to, before Housing Matters, which is part of an entire week at MIPIM, but also Coliv is organizing several events, such as a Sunset Connect event on the beach, a networking event, and private barbecues and apéros. So there will be a lot of events during the week. And we with ArtofCo, we're going to organize a mastermind the weekend just before that. So on March 8th to 10th, again, we're going to come with 10 co-living entrepreneurs. We have already 5 confirmed. We're going to meet around near Cannes and book a big Airbnb and spend 2 days really digging into different types of topics, exchanging, learning from one another, having discussions, and also co-living for 48 hours. And yes, participation fees will lie around €350 per person, €350 per person, just based on the shared Airbnb. So if you're interested, we're gonna send out a follow-up form just afterwards. Let us know, and it will be really cool to have you there as well. That is it for today. So we're gonna send you a follow-up. You're gonna have access to the recording and to the presentation, the link to the Housing Matters event, and we'll also send you the link for the incubator and accelerator applications, but especially for the application to the masterminds. And finally, I thought about something, which is next month is going to be about community and user experience. So we're gonna also send you the extract of the Art of Co-Living on that subject. It's gonna be around 20 pages. And for those who haven't read it, please feel free to start exploring there already, because it's gonna help you and give a good understanding for next month. And next month, we're then gonna dig deeper, and we're really gonna map out how to map a user experience from A to Z, so that you can apply it to your concept and then figure out your tech needs, but as well as your team needs. That will be the next session. Voila, thank you very much. Thanks for everybody. So I wanted to see, maybe we can take a few questions if anybody has some. I'm looking through the chat. There's been a lot of chats. Unfortunately, I was not able to see. Would anybody want to ask a question right now? Maybe let's take two, and let's take 5 more minutes to sum it up. Feel free to raise your hand. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Hi.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Guy. I want to say thank you. I thought you've given so much material, and also what you've sent me. I think it's fantastic, and I'm definitely would like to continue on our journey. I think this is essential for the world of the future. If we find better ways of housing for people, the economy is not going to get any better in the years to come. And we need to go back to a society which has more empathy and more kindness towards each other. And in the co-housing, we have an opportunity to create that. So yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moshe. Really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Well, if nobody has questions, please, you can put them in chat right now. And let's see. Yes, Rosella. Please. 1 second, I'll just ask you to unmute. Wait.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes, I was wondering if there is some thoughts going on about integration of pets, like dogs or cats in the co-living spaces, like in special areas. I've been working this out in my past job for Nestle and Purina Pet Care, how to integrate pets in our life, because I think also in the future of cities, there is also the future of pets. So there is some kind of thoughts. Maybe we could also consider to think further about which co-livings would accept pets, how and in which spaces you would recommend them or not.
Amazing. Good question.
Big question.
I guess good question, right? I guess it already depends on maybe your type of co-living. So imagine it's like yours, right? 15, 20 people. If you have like the house dog, right? Like it could be actually really, really cool for the co-living space. When it comes then to like shared apartments in cities, usually co-living operators tend to not allow pets because you're sharing small apartments with like other members. And I guess if you're creating something like a hybrid, like micro units, where everybody might have maybe 15 to like 30 square meters, in that case, it could make sense to include pets because everybody can have enough private space to keep animals in there. So if any other operator also wants to share in the chat what they're doing, feel free. But these will be my thoughts. And somebody also asked, like, what what are some innovations in terms of pod design? And it's a really good question. And here I would have a look at co-living spaces in Los Angeles, because the number one innovation is that there's more and more co-living spaces that want to tackle the notion of affordability, which right now co-living spaces are not really positioned on. So, and with new types of pods, meaning like pods that are a bit more spacious, maybe going from 3 square meters to 5 to 6, but a lot of innovation is needed here. So I would check out co-living spaces in Los Angeles for inspiration. Okay, I'm gonna ask Jose as well. Hey, Jose.
Thank you for everything. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Awesome. Great to be here. So nice to see there's so much interest in people moving the industry forward. I was just wondering, I liked how you presented sort of the ease of sharing the pyramid. And I was wondering if there was any research that has been done regarding people's willingness to share. I know that probably changes along the adoption curve with people more the early adopters. So can you share if there's anything been done with that, or have you kind of looked into it? I'm eager to know maybe like what things are more likely to be shared, not from consumer sentiment, and what groups perhaps.
Yes, very good question. So I'm gonna share my screen. Have you heard of the One Shared House survey?
I have heard of it, but I haven't really looked fully into it.
So it was a survey created, I believe, in 2000, maybe 18.
Uh-huh.
And they researched a lot of, here we go. They researched what people were willing to share. And so I highly recommend to check it out because there's a bunch of statistics.
Yeah.
The website is also super funky, but there's a report that you can find on the website. It's going to give you, I think, an idea of like there's only 4 or 6% that are not willing to share anything, and then like around 80% are willing to share living room, and 40% are willing to share X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to put this in the chat, and this is the closest I know of like a study that has been done around like what people are willing to share.
Amazing, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, it's in the chat. Okay. Perfect. So